In this video, we're going to take a look at how hormones work with the kidneys to maintain things like blood pressure, water balance, salt balance in the blood, and even oxygen levels. The first one we'll take a look at is antidiuretic hormone, better known as ADH. Now, the first two triggers here that are acted upon are when blood pressure is low. And blood pressure being low can occur typically because of a low blood volume. So, if an animal or a human being has lost some blood in an injury, blood pressure is going to drop. The other thing that will trigger the release of ADH is high blood osmolality. Now, this is a fancy way of saying essentially there is not much water in the blood. Everything's reversed here. So, high blood osmolality means we have a whole lot of solute in the blood and not as much water. So we've got a sort of dehydrated condition, or we're losing blood volume because of an injury of some sort. Now, either of those triggers is going to be noticed by the hypothalamus, the main homeostasis control center of the body. And that hypothalamus is going to send out a signal to the posterior pituitary, which is going to start sending out ADH into the bloodstream. And that ADH will go and interact with its target cells in the kidneys, which we remember are made up of millions of nephrons. And what will happen is inside that nephron, ADH will open up transporters for water to be reabsorbed out of the urine back into the bloodstream, causing the person to produce less urine and holding back onto that water, recovering it. And that will have a negative effect on that low blood pressure. So that extra volume of blood will raise blood pressure back up, and adding in that extra solute into the blood, that extra solvent, into the bloodstream will dilute that solute and allow us to kind of prevent the effects of dehydration from taking effect. So that's the ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. It's designed to recover water in the collecting ducts of the nephrons. Now, the next one we'll take a look at is known as the RAS, or the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And it's a pretty complicated system that is essentially triggered by low blood pressure. So when the kidneys themselves sense low blood pressure, what's going to happen is the kidneys will start secreting this hormone known as renin. And renin will go out into the body and it will cause a cascade of effects. It will interact with some information coming from the liver and the lungs, and then it will produce this hormone known as angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 is going to have a cascade of effects throughout the body to counteract that low blood pressure. And we'll take a look at its effects on the whole system, but in particular, we'll then zoom in on what's happening with aldosterone in terms of what's happening directly into the kidney. So what the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is doing is renin is going out into the bloodstream. Now, when that blood pressure drops, that renin goes out in the bloodstream and combines with a protein from the liver known as angiotensinogen, and that produces angiotensin 1. And angiotensin 1 interacts with some enzymes typically found in different places in the body, but particularly in our lungs. And that enzyme is known as an ACE enzyme, or angiotensin converting enzyme. And that takes angiotensin, essentially activates it into angiotensin 2. And then what angiotensin 2 is going to do is a bunch of things. It's going to cause blood vessels to essentially squeeze down, and that reduction in the size of the blood vessels will essentially keep blood pressure going up and raise it back up because it's triggered by a lower blood pressure at past a certain threshold. And you can maybe remember this because angio refers to arteries, especially in blood vessels. Tense means to squeeze or get tighter. So angiotensin 2 is going to cause blood vessels to constrict, which is going to raise the pressure of the fluid flowing through them. But when angiotensin 2 gets towards the kidneys, it's going to interact with the adrenal gland, which is sitting on top of that kidney, and it's going to cause the release of a hormone known as aldosterone. It also goes by the name vasopressin, but you'll probably hear it mostly as aldosterone. Tends to be the name of the hormone most of the time. And then what aldosterone will do is when it gets to the distal tubule, in particular with those nephrons, it'll cause those nephrons to reabsorb sodium, and water will follow in the collecting duct. So by reabsorbing the salt, we are causing water to be reabsorbed. That's raising the volume of the blood, and that is causing blood pressure to go back up. So we have a way with the RAS of raising blood pressure back up by recovering sodium. We will also end up recovering water, but primarily we're recovering sodium. So there's kind of a look at the overall effects of angiotensin 2. Again, renin's being released, causing angiotensin to be produced, and that's being activated by those ACE enzymes in our lung tissue. And angiotensin 2 is causing the constriction of blood vessels, known as vasoconstriction. It will stimulate the pituitary gland to release some ADH. It's causing the adrenal gland to produce aldosterone, which causes us to reabsorb sodium, which raises blood volume. So ultimately, angiotensin 2 acts on our kidneys with the RAS system to cause the reabsorption of sodium, but also a little bit of water, and that's going to raise blood pressure. And the last one we'll take a look at is the EPO, or erythropoietin system. And this is a response that the kidneys have and our bodies have to low oxygen levels. So when oxygen levels are low, our lips might turn blue a little bit. This is a situation known as hypoxia, so low oxygen levels in the bloodstream. And when those oxygen levels are low, and this is typically known as things like blue lips or blue fingertips, that low oxygen is actually sensed by our kidneys, and that causes our kidneys to secrete a hormone known as erythropoietin, or EPO for short. And what EPO does is it goes out into the bone marrow, and inside that bone marrow, it causes the production of red blood cells from the stem cells found in bone marrow. So it puts the iron together and the hemoglobin, and that produces those red blood cells. And then our red blood cell levels go up, and now there's more oxygen carriers essentially when those red blood cells get to the lungs, and that will cure the hypoxia issue. So that's the EPO, or erythropoietin system. And EPO is also a performance enhancing substance that some professional athletes will use to gain an advantage, especially in competitions where stamina and endurance are a big thing.